The studio buzzed with that strange mixture of electricity and fragility that only live television could create. Producers jogged between cameras, adjusting lights, whispering into headsets, glancing nervously toward the table where the hosts of The View gathered in their usual semicircle. But the tension didn't originate with them. It came from the guest chair, specifically from the quiet, calm presence occupying it. Emma Watson sat with a composed stillness that drew looks from everyone around her. She had arrived early, exchanging soft greetings with the crew, sipping her herbal tea, reviewing her notes with the sort of steady concentration that suggested nothing could rattle her. But backstage, people had noticed something else. Sunny Hostin had been unusually intense during prep. Her cards were marked up with thick strokes of red pen. Her brows were knit tightly, like she had come preparing for more than an interview. From the moment the theme music faded and Emma was introduced, that energy became palpable. Whoopi started things warmly, as she always did, praising Emma's recent humanitarian work and new documentary. Emma thanked her politely, offering a gracious smile to the audience. But Sunny didn't join the pleasantries. She watched Emma with a slow, assessing stare, like she was waiting for the exact moment to strike. It came sooner than anyone expected. "So, Emma," Sunny began sharply, sliding her prep cards aside as if the question had been simmering long before she got to her seat, "you've been quite vocal lately about wanting more privacy and encouraging young women to step away from the spotlight. Some critics are calling that hypocritical. After all, you built your entire career on the very public attention you now warn against." The words dropped like stones. The audience shifted. A couple of gasps fluttered through the air. Even Joy blinked, surprised Sunny had opened with that. Emma, however, didn't flinch. She kept her chin lifted, her posture relaxed, her expression open. If the question bothered her, she didn't let it show. "I think there's a misunderstanding," she replied calmly. "I'm not telling anyone to avoid the spotlight. I'm encouraging people, especially young women, to know that they're allowed boundaries. Fame doesn't need to mean surrendering every part of your life." Sunny leaned in, eyes narrowing. "But the attention is why you're successful. Isn't it contradictory to benefit from visibility and then tell others they shouldn't want it?" More murmurs. A couple of audience members exchanged looks. Was Sunny really going there? Emma folded her hands loosely on the table. "I benefited from acting," she answered gently. "Not from invasion, not from pressure, and certainly not from being treated like public property." Sunny's jaw twitched just slightly. "But your fans say you're becoming more distant. That they don't see you as much. Don't you think you have a responsibility to stay accessible?" Emma blinked once, slow, thoughtful, the kind of blink that signaled patience rather than irritation. "I have a responsibility to be honest," she said, voice steady. "Not available." That line struck the room like a tuning fork. A ripple of soft applause rose, unbidden. The audience didn't erupt, but the approval was unmistakable. Sunny forced a thin smile, but it wasn't friendly. "Let's talk about your activism then," she pushed on. "Some critics, high-profile ones, say your activism is selective. That you speak loudly about some women's issues, but stay silent about others. Particularly issues affecting women who don't look like you." The temperature dropped. Joy sucked in a sharp breath. Alyssa shifted uncomfortably. Whoopi raised her eyebrows, clearly sensing they were drifting into dangerous waters. But Emma showed no shock. No flash of defensiveness. Only a subtle tightening around her eyes, hurt, not anger. "With respect," she said softly, "that's not accurate. I've worked with organizations in more than a dozen countries. I've collaborated with activists from communities very different from mine. And I continue to do so." Sunny opened her mouth to interject, but Emma held up a hand, not abruptly, not aggressively, just firmly enough to reclaim the floor. "And Sunny," she continued, "I think we need to be careful about something. Women are often expected to comment on every issue to be considered genuine. Men are rarely held to that standard." That landed hard. The audience broke into louder applause this time. Someone even whistled. Sunny's lips pressed into a thin line. Emma wasn't attacking. She wasn't mocking. She was simply stating a truth, clearly, calmly, and with the sort of steel that didn't need to raise its voice to be felt. Sunny's voice sharpened. "But don't you think that if you're going to call yourself an activist?" Emma stopped her with a small shake of her head. "I don't call myself anything," she said. "Labels aren't the point. The work is the point. And the work doesn't always happen in front of cameras." The applause came again, fuller this time. Emma wasn't grandstanding. She was simply too grounded, too articulate, too prepared to be rattled. Sunny shuffled her cards, clearly searching for a new line, something, anything, to regain control of the interview. But Emma wasn't rushing, wasn't flustered, wasn't even slightly aggressive. Boundaries aren't hypocrisy, Emma said gently. They're survival, especially for women in the public eye. And if my speaking about that helps even one young woman realize she doesn't owe the world unlimited access, then I'm perfectly comfortable with any criticism that comes my way. Sunny's face tightened at the word criticism, as if she felt its implications personally. She lifted her chin, preparing another rebuttal. When the show returned from commercial break, the air felt different, thicker, heavier, charged with the kind of tension no amount of makeup powder could hide. The producers had hoped the break would cool things down, but instead it only seemed to distill everything, leaving the table sharper edged than before. Even the audience sensed it, their applause cautious as the camera panned back across the hosts. Emma Watson sat exactly as she had before the break, calm, collected, her posture straight but never stiff. She didn't check her notes. She didn't sip her water. She simply waited for the conversation to resume, her expression giving nothing away. Sunny Hostin, however, was visibly unsettled. During the break, she'd shuffled her cards with an intensity that suggested she was preparing for round two. She smiled when the cameras came back on, but the smile never reached her eyes. Whoopi took the lead again, announcing the next topic, the documentary Emma had been working on about literacy programs for girls in rural communities. The safe topic, the producer's choice, the olive branch, but Sunny wasn't ready for peace. Right, Sunny interjected before Whoopi could finish, but before we move on, I'd like to go back to something Emma said before the break. A synchronized shift happened across the table. Joy's eyebrows rose, Alyssa pursed her lips, even Whoopi gave a subtle look toward the producers, as if to say we talked about this. Emma turned her head slightly, giving Sunny her full attention. Not defensive, not wary, just present. Sunny continued, her tone deceptively polite. Emma, you talked about boundaries and authenticity, which is fine. But I think there's another issue here. Some people believe that celebrities, especially ones with your level of privilege, step back from the spotlight only when it becomes uncomfortable, not because they suddenly care about privacy. The audience reacted, audible gasps, a couple uncomfortable laughs, someone whispering, oh no. Emma didn't react physically, but something in her gaze sharpened. Sunny pressed on, so I have to ask, are you stepping back for your mental health, or because facing criticism is inconvenient for your brand? The studio fell silent. Joy opened her mouth as if to intervene, but Emma spoke first. And she didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward or adopt the posture of someone preparing for battle. She simply inhaled, slow and steady, and answered with clarity so precise it felt like a blade. Sunny, she said gently, choosing mental health is not the same thing as avoiding accountability. Sunny blinked, thrown off by the directness. Emma continued, her tone warm but unmistakably firm. I speak openly about the importance of privacy because, for years, I believed I wasn't allowed to have any. Not as a child actor. Not as a young woman. Not as a public figure. People felt entitled to my life, my body, my choices. She paused, and when I finally learned that I could step back without apologizing for it, I did. The audience applauded softly but emotionally. Sunny's expression grew tighter, but Emma wasn't finished. You mentioned privilege, she said. And you're absolutely right, I have it. Which is exactly why I use it to help others access resources they've been denied. It's why I work with grassroots groups rather than only high-profile organizations. It's why I don't broadcast every project I'm involved in. Because sometimes the most impactful work happens quietly. Sunny opened her mouth, but Emma cut in, not aggressively, but with timing so precise Sunny couldn't find a foothold. And if I may be honest, Emma said, her voice lowering, there's a harmful idea that women must constantly prove their worth, justify their decisions, and publicly perform emotional labor for others. And the moment they choose not to, they're labeled selfish, hypocritical, or out of touch. The crowd clapped louder now. Whoopi's eyebrows lifted with a look that said she's not wrong. Sunny's jaw tightened in frustration. But Emma, no one is saying you owe the world your private life. Emma's tone stayed soft, but the firmness beneath it was unmistakable. But that's exactly what you implied. You suggested that prioritizing my mental health was somehow a weakness. Or an excuse. Sunny's face flushed, and she reached for her water glass, buying herself a few seconds. The other co-host stayed silent. Emma leaned forward just slightly, still composed, still kind, but with a quiet authority that filled the table. Women are allowed to step back, she said. They're allowed to not be available on demand. They're allowed to choose themselves without being shamed for it. Then she added, with a gentleness so sharp it stunned the room. And no woman, famous or not, owes anyone permission to protect the parts of herself she's still healing. The audience erupted in applause. Not polite applause, full, resonant, echoing applause, like relief, like validation, like something they'd been waiting to hear someone say. Sunny's composure cracked visibly. Her fingers curled around her cue cards, knuckles whitening. Well, she said stiffly, I think viewers can decide for themselves what they feel about that. Emma gave her a small, sincere smile. They should, and I trust them too. Alyssa leaned in quickly, sensing the powder keg. Emma, she said brightly, why don't you tell us more about your documentary? I know audiences would love to hear how you chose the communities you worked with. Emma shifted effortlessly into the topic, her voice returning to its calm, grounded rhythm. She spoke about the girls she had interviewed, the teachers working with almost no resources, the joy of seeing a child write her name for the first time. But even as she spoke, the tension between her and Sunny pulsed beneath the surface, the kind of tension that comes when one person tries to corner another and discovers the walls they intended to trap them with have been quietly, expertly dismantled. By the time the segment wrapped, Whoopi closed with a tone that said she was both impressed and relieved.